Data science and any data-inspired and data-driven science is so critical right now. More and more decisions are made based on data. The amount of data that we gather every day and the insights that the data can provide us is just growing exponentially, and that is no exaggeration.
The market for data science and related areas like AI is booming.
It is so important to have women in artificial intelligence, in the area of data science, and also in leadership roles. It's being able to use data to solve issues and understand bigger problems. It's critical. And we need women in these roles. Every individual brings their own perspective, and so we need to make sure the entire workforce is represented.
And the good news is there's so many jobs and many different ways to combine their passion area and their skills in data science and get involved.
I would like you to say, what are the problems in the world that absolutely have to be changed? And can you individually, given all the amazing background that you've had so far and all the education that you've got so far, what are the unique things that you can do to change the world towards that mission? And then think of the technology.
If that is going to become completely data-driven over time, then you can't miss that opportunity. You've got to join in and have your say.
If you're not looking at the data from all sorts of different angles, then you could introduce a lot of bias. So it's really, really important that we have around the table all genders, all races, all backgrounds.
We can't ignore social and structural problems. We can't just go in a corner and write some code and read math and then that's the solution, right? Can't do that. So we have to think about who is being affected by these algorithms.
Welcome to WiDS!
When we first started this conference, we never would have imagined that we'd be sitting here today with over 200 regional events. We've got over 500 WiDS ambassadors worldwide. Many of them are women, but we've also got a lot of men. And these are people who are just passionate about inspiring others within their community. We're in over 60 countries, and year after year, we're blown away.
Let's make this next decade the Women in the Data Science decade.
What I love about it is that growth is viral. That people will attend one event in one city and then they'll want to bring it to their cohort or colleagues the next year.
This type of industry can be done everywhere, so it should be accessible to everybody. And this is one of the reasons why I love that we are global with WiDS.
So we wanted to create opportunities for women to inspire, educate, and support women at many different times throughout the year. And one way that we decided we could do that was through a datathon every year, which is a predictive analytics challenge using real-world data. We have over 900 teams from 85 countries, and that's in every continent except Antarctica.
When we started WiDS in 2015, we had no idea this was going to be a global movement with tons of international events and a datathon and a podcast show and now outreach to middle school and high school. It's just been such a ride.
Our latest endeavor is to work on some materials that we can hand off to teachers in schools around the world.
This has provided a platform for literally hundreds of women, if not thousands of women, to have an opportunity to be heard.
But the truth is, these are really simple experiments, but they had profound impact because they empowered someone else to be able to do their job better or to be able to take that message.
5 years ago, when we were sitting around a coffee table thinking about what WiDS could be, I never in my wildest dreams thought it would grow so far and so wide around the world in just 5 years. But what I'm most excited about is the next 5 years, because I think this is really just the start.
Hello, welcome everybody to the very first Women in Data Science conference in Villach. Here offline in the room, but also online on the live stream. You saw it already, we have a live stream, so there are many participants also online who could not come today. Welcome, we're excited that you're here.
Like the WiDS Stanford initiators, we're excited decided that already at the first WiDS Villach conference, we are more than 80 participants, some of who are online, some of you are here in the room, that originated from 27 countries, but mainly work here in Carinthia. Of course, we did not expect that too.
Yes, and as we heard already in the video, so this diversity in the WiDS community, we have it also here. So we are not only 80 participants with 27 nationalities, we are diverse in gender, so women and men are here. We are diverse in our background, in our cultural background. We are diverse also in our education background, so we have undergraduate students from staff to government people, to startups, to industry people. So it's a really nice setup for networking and discussion afterwards.
For Olivia and me, this is the perfect setting for today's mission, to support and to push women in data science and to create a regional but still very diverse community.
And to me also, it's very important to support that, because we heard it. It's important to support women in the field, and we know that women are underrepresented in STEM education and also in STEM jobs and so on. But to me, it's a personal opinion, if I'm at conferences, at stage, women are even lower represented than they are in the jobs. So we really have to give women the stage, and this is why we do this today. So, yeah, what we start now, this is maybe not so traditional for a conference, but it's very traditional for women in data science. You saw it already, maybe some spots in the video. We do an audience selfie. We try today with a distance. So, sorry that not everybody may fit on the picture, but we do it. And I'm not such a selfie queen, so I'm trying now to do this. So. At least smile. I try some. Oh, with some angles. Okay, thanks a lot. And then, thank you also Anita, so my co-ambassador Anita, for being here on stage. And as soon as I have time, I will post it on social media. And I invite you to do the same. So please make pictures. You're allowed to do so. You're allowed to talk about it. Share your impressions online, use our hashtags, then we find it, use whatever social medium you would like to use, and talk about what's happening today here. And with that, that's actually everything from my side. We have two special guests here today, and I would like to invite you to be on stage and to address some welcome words also to our community here. And first, I would like to ask the Vice Dean for Engineering and IT from the Carinthian University of Applied Sciences, so from the hosts of today's event, Ulla Birnbacher.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy, really feeling it in my body, to welcome you here in person today, but also online, of course. To welcome you here on behalf of our faculty, the Department of Engineering and IT, and on behalf of our university, the Carinthian University of Applied Science. We are here today in our largest lecture hall in order to have enough space. In general, we have place for 300 people. You know this, due to the corona crisis, we are limited. Nevertheless, it's big enough to host us all and to also include people on the internet to participate here. So we have the technology, everything is ready to connect here in presence and also in the virtual internet. The last 3 months have shown us that everything is ready, internet, the video, the audio, everything is ready, that we can work in the internet, that we can work online, that we can do lectures. Yeah, we did not stop our students to start to exchange ideas, to generate new ideas, to discuss things. Yeah, so I think this is really the particular important part today. The conference was shifted from March, where we had to cancel it, to September. Yeah, that the situation currently is not going in the way we wanted, but nevertheless we took the chance, and I'm happy that we do it and did not have to cancel it. So what I hope that we use this opportunity to come together, nevertheless, keeping distance, following all the rules, of course, but that we can use this opportunity to get into contact and to do what we want to do, networking, because this is all about. And I want to thank you that you bring WiDS to Villach. Yeah? I'm a woman in engineering. You know how little women there are, but I think data science is a chance to bring us all together and to look what we can do for the future. So welcome, and I wish you a successful conference.
Thank you very much for these nice words, and we just go to our next special guest, Sabine Herrlichka from Infineon Austria. Please, the stage is yours.
Women in data science in Villach. Wow, super. And congratulations that together you made it possible. As a host, as organizer, being part, I was really touched by the movie in the beginning, being part of this global initiative. This is where we have to be. Now, I was asked to share a few comments on the relevance of the field. And doing this from the position of the most research-intense company in Austria. That's what we are. We have been very much on the news with our huge investment, 1.6 billion, that we invest here in Villach in the expansion of our knowledge-intensive manufacturing, creating jobs, despite the fact that we are going to further develop our highly automated, digitalized manufacturing. But the field is much broader, and this is what I want to underline. We are talking, and you have put together a fantastic program. We are talking about artificial intelligence and all the applications. Very trivial, but I want to mention it in this context as well. We already are, and we will be even more, find ourselves in a data-based, data-driven economy. This is not just about Corona. Corona has been the accelerator for many developments, but we are already, and you as actors in the field are very much aware of it, we are already in a data-based economy. So it's all about data. Therefore, whenever I am asked what is the most important job profile, what are the people we are looking most for, these are data scientists. Yeah? People who are able to deal with data. It's not just about accumulating data, it's about asking the right questions and being able to take advantage out of the data. And this is what you do. And this is essential for us as economy, for us also as Infineon, as actor here in the region, in research and development, in our global business activities, in our manufacturing activities. And please be aware, as important as you are as experts in the field, but at this point, we as Europe, we do not have the European data infrastructure, by the way. Whenever we talk about artificial intelligence and everything that builds on data, at this point, we do not have our data, our digital, let's say, sovereignty. We depend on others to apply those important technologies, artificial intelligence, develop benefits for us. So this is a key issue, and hopefully, and at European level, many discussions are ongoing to strengthen our European digital autonomy. Because if everything depends on data, we must not be dependent on others in this respect. Now, data scientists, yeah, you are key, that's what I mentioned already, but you are not only key because it's an important field, because we live in a data economy.
It's a real pleasure for me to be here and see so many wonderful and talented women here and on the other side of the camera entering a field that I entered almost 30 years ago now in the early 90s, and it makes me feel really old, but and there weren't a lot of women in this field back then, and it's wonderful to see so many wonderful, talented young women entering this space, and I think it'll make a huge difference. So I'll tell you today about what I'm doing in this field right now. I spent my career at Stanford actually working at what I think of as the boundary between two disciplines. One of those is machine learning and data science, and the other one is biology and health. And I use the word boundary rather than intersection deliberately because there really wasn't that much of an intersection between those two fields at the time, because the data that was available on the biology and health side was relatively limited. And so you could apply fairly simple statistical tools, but you couldn't really apply very sophisticated methods. It was a real challenge, and I think that's changing, and I think this is the right time to come back into the space and do amazing things, and I hope that the talk today will be able to convince you of that. So if you think about drug discovery and development, it's kind of a real interesting glass half full, glass half empty perspective. On the one hand, the glass half full is that in the last 50 years, discovery has enabled drugs that have taken diseases that used to be a death sentence or a sentence to a lifelong of pain and agony into something that is now manageable or sometimes even a cure. And cure is a very rare word in medicine today. That includes vaccines for infectious diseases, cancer immunotherapies, autoimmune system modulators. One of my favorite stories is the cystic fibrosis drugs by Vertex, which took something that used to be a death sentence at the age of 20 and now gives 90% of those patients effectively an almost normal life. It is a remarkable tale of achievement. The glass half empty is this other side, which has come to be known as Irum's law. Now, those of you here in the audience, I'm sure are very familiar with Moore's law. Irum is the inverse of Moore because it is an exponential decrease in productivity of pharmaceutical R&D consistently for the last 70 years. This is a graph on a logarithmic scale where this is the number of drugs approved per 1 billion US dollars. The price tag of approval for a new drug is now $2.5 billion. Now, that is not because that single drug incurs $2.5 billion on its journey from idea to approval. It's because that one drug carries on its back the many, many thousands or tens of thousands of drugs that didn't quite make it. So really what's going on in drug discovery and development is this is a 15-year journey, often, maybe longer, from idea to approval, with many, many forks in the road, where one fork, if we're lucky, takes us to success, 99 don't, and we have only the very limited tools to make a decision on which of the paths in front of us are going to lead us to success, and taking the wrong one can be a matter of years and tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars before we figure out that we took the wrong turn. So how can we make better predictions of downstream outcomes, hopefully helping bend that curve on the last slide? So this is where I think machine learning and data science could potentially play a role. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to some of the developments in machine learning, maybe not as useful in this audience, but I think interesting nonetheless. I've been amazed at how much progress has been made even in the last 5 years. So back in 2005, I used to do a lot of computer vision, and you would give this image to a computer and ask, is there a bear in this image, a simple binary classification problem? And the answer would be slightly better than random. 2012, this is the era of ImageNet, which was created by my colleague here at Stanford, former colleague and friend, Fei Li. And this gave machine learning enough training data to the point that you could actually start answering a much harder question of what is in this image, multi-class classification problem. And the label for this image would probably be wolf. This is actually a bear, but it's a wolfy looking bear, so, you know, not so bad. 2014, an actual label from the state-of-the-art algorithm, a brown bear is swimming in the water. The bear isn't in the water, but there is a brown bear and there is water, so this is actually pretty good. In 2017, 2 bears sitting on top of rocks. Today, the performance of machine learning for this problem is demonstrably beyond human level performance for tasks that each of us has been trained to perform since we were an infant. So the fact that you could actually achieve beyond human level performance is actually, to me, remarkable. Now, what made this possible? So if you look at the models that we used to employ way back when, in the early days of machine learning, these were usually simple models constructed on top of human-constructed features. So things like logistic regression or random forest, and people had to do a lot of what's called feature engineering to feed those algorithms. And it turns out that those algorithms started out pretty good because they introduced a lot of human bias knowledge into this, but they asymptoted at a relatively low level. Today, we basically don't do that anymore. The computer starts out with Scratch and just the raw features, and it takes it longer in some ways. You require more data to reach a high level of performance, but it turns out the computers actually end up constructing better features than people do, which is why the performance keeps going up and up. So specifically, if you look at what we do today, this is what's come to be known as deep learning. And so the computer, for instance, in the case of images, starts with raw features, basic pixels, and it constructs an increasingly complex hierarchy of features built on top of other features, so that in the end, it's able to construct features that are very subtle and can make distinctions like between an Arctic fox and an Eskimo dog, where a person would be really hard put to define a feature that would actually make that distinction. The other aspect of this, which is important and comes back on the next slide, is that there is also a new representational learning aspect here. So if the original images, say, are 1,000 by 1,000, and let's think grayscale for simplicity, then they sit in a 1,000,000-dimensional space. At the end of the day, just before the final prediction is made, that vector is usually about 100 dimensions large. So we have taken 1,000,000 dimensions and compressed it into 100 dimensions, and those are meaningful features that the computer constructed. So from a mathematical perspective, what that actually means is that the machine has actually created a 100-dimensional manifold in a 1,000,000-dimensional space and has embedded all those 1,000,000-dimensional images in that 100-dimensional representation. And that space actually has interesting structure because there's an infinite number, a continuum of manifolds that one could construct, but the machine has to actually put next to each other images that are labeled the same way. So these two trucks, even though in the original space would be as far from each other as any other two random images, here they have to be next to each other. And because the hierarchy of features is learned jointly, other classes that are not labeled the same way but share some features like windshields and tires are going to be next to each other in this manifold, whereas other classes like cats and dogs are in a very different part of the space. Okay, so that's the this is the glass half full side of machine learning. In light of the earlier comments, let me actually talk a little bit about the glass half empty side of machine learning and why quality of data is of paramount importance. So it turns out that these really powerful machine learning algorithms that are really good at teasing apart subtle signal are equally good at latching onto subtle artifacts. So this is one of my favorite examples. It's from an archive paper in 2018. This is a paper that looked at how bias can creep into algorithms in the context of a radiology problem where you're trying to diagnose fractures from an X-ray image. This is the input, and you can see they got really good ROC curves. It's not perfect, but really compelling. And then they looked at the embedding of that manifold that I talked about and they visualize it. And they notice the following unfortunate fact, which is that if you look at that embedding and you look at the distribution of fracture versus non-fracture, actually kind of nicely distributed across the clusters. So the machine hasn't learned to really distinguish fracture from non-fracture. What it learned to do really well is distinguish the machine, the X-ray machine that took the image. Really, really well. And so it turns out that in fact, when you correct for that, you basically get close to random performance. And what turns out to be the case is that just certain hospitals have a larger predominance of fractures and a certain X-ray machine, and that's what it latched onto, which highlights the importance of having really high quality data as well as a very rigorous testing regime. So we'll come back to that later. Okay, so why am I back in this space after so many years? It's because I think we now have the opportunity to actually create and utilize massive data sets in biomedicine that didn't exist before. So in some ways, there have been two revolutions going on in parallel in two different fields that haven't really spoken to each other. On the left hand is advances in cell biology and bioengineering, each of which has been transformative on its own, but together they've enabled a perfect storm of data creation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these advancements. The first of those is what's called induced pluripotent stem cells. It is an invention, a discovery that earned Yamanaka a Nobel Prize a few years ago. And what it is the ability to take, say, skin cells or white blood cells from any one of us, revert them to stem cell status, which is a pluripotent type of cell that can create any cell lineage in our body, and then differentiate them into neurons or hepatocytes or cardiomyocytes that carry our genetics. And so it enables us to create cellular models that capture the genetic diversity of a normal human population in the cell background that is relevant to disease. We have, using technologies like CRISPR, the ability to furthermore perturb these cells to probe at causality. What would happen if I changed this gene from this form to that form? How does that cell behave differently? We have the ability to gauge behaviors using a range of technologies of high content, what's called phenotyping, measuring those cells using imaging, using super resolution microscopy, using single cell RNA sequencing that measures the transcriptional profile, and many more that are currently emerging. And we can do it all at scale using automation and microfluidics. This creates an incredible amount of data that looks like this image on the left. And people are unable to make sense of that amount of data. And so that's where the machine learning revolution that we're all familiar with can come together with the revolution on the left and really make sense of these data and help us understand biology and find new treatments for disease. So what we're doing is we're trying to put this together, coming back to the Eroom's Law slide before, to come up with explicitly trained models that can perform predictions on which fork in the road we want to take. So we're looking for places where such a prediction will make a big difference to the probability of success, where machine learning is the right tool for the job, and where we can produce the right data at the right quality and the right scale so that we don't have this example that I showed before with the radiology images. So I can tell you about a number of efforts that we're making along these lines. Since I don't have as much time today, I'm only going to take you about one, but it's the one that we think is the most core, which is how do we predict human clinical outcome? If I make this intervention in a human, what will it do? Now you're sitting here thinking, well, how can you create a data set where you measure human clinical outcome? We don't get to do experiments in people until the very end of the process, which is what's called a randomized clinical trial, and that is absolutely right. And so part of the idea here is how do we use other forms of data to answer this question? So currently, the state of the art, if you will, the normal standard operating procedure for answering the question, what will an intervention do when administered to a human, is, well, we can't administer it to a human, so we're going to administer it to a mouse. Now, the problem, unfortunately, is that mice are just not people. And mice don't get most of the diseases that are the unmet need today. Mice don't get atherosclerosis, they don't get Alzheimer's, they don't get Parkinson's, they don't get autism or schizophrenia or type 2 diabetes, they don't get any of those things. So we create artificial diseases in these animals that are very different to humans, and then we cure these artificial diseases, and then we're surprised when the results don't translate into human clinical outcome. So the question is, how can we use humans as a model system for humans. So as I said, you don't get to perform experiments in humans, but here's something that we can do. Each of us is an experiment of nature. Each of us is an experiment where Mother Nature has perturbed thousands of genes in our genome, and we can measure outcome, clinical outcome of different people to see how that connection between genotype and phenotype manifests. And this is a place where you actually do have a Moore's law slide. This is a graph again on a logarithmic scale, and this is the number of human genome sequences since the very first human genome in 2001. And you can see that not only is this growing exponentially, it's growing exponentially twice as fast as Moore's law. So depending on whether you believe this trend line to continue, the number of human genome sequenced by 2025 or 2027 will be somewhere around 100 million to 2 billion. That's a lot of genomes. Genomes on their own are great. When combined with phenotypes, they are better. There's less human clinical outcome data available, but there's more and more coming. One of my favorite resources in this regard is the UK Biobank. The UK government was very forward-thinking in creating a cohort of 500,000 just normal individuals with whatever diseases they may or may not end up developing. And they collected thousands and thousands of phenotypic outcome data on them, including multiple covariates like diet and environment and urinary and blood biomarkers, and for 100,000 of them full body and brain imaging, and many, many other phenotypes that are incredibly valuable. And there's more of these cohorts emerging. Here in the United States, we have the All of Us cohort, which is about supposed to be 1 million people, also more genetically diverse than the UK cohort, which is predominantly European. So it's going to be a great resource, and there's others emerging over time. So if you take genotype and phenotype and put them together, you basically have a suggestion of causality. And because to a reasonable first cut approximation, a genetic variant that associates with disease is roughly causal of that disease if you can actually figure out what that is. So that's great, and sure enough, from the in the last 10 or so years since these efforts first started, there's been thousands of traits that have been associated, each with hundreds or thousands of different genetic loci that associate presumably causally with this disease. Some of these are diseases, others are for normal traits like height or even educational attainment or bone mineral density. All of these have genetic loci associated with them. Now, the thing is, for each of those traits, there's usually hundreds of different loci in the genome that have an association with that trait, often with a very small effect size, and how do we figure out which is which? Now, so it turns out that indeed when you have genetic evidence from human genetics for a disease, if you have a drug against that target, it increases your probability of approval. So if you look at the graph on the right-hand side here, you can see that the odds ratio of approval for a drug that has human genetic support is about 2x, which is really an incredible improvement in probability of approval. So that's great. The problem is it's not that simple. Coming back to what I mentioned before, not all targets in this case are created equal. If you look at targets that are Mendelian, in the sense that it's a one gene, one disease association, that odds ratio creeps closer to 3. The ones that come from the genome-wide association studies, where, as I said, there's hundreds of loci and you don't know which one matters, that odds ratio is actually less than 1.5. So it's actually difficult to figure out which of those makes a difference. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come back to this other revolution that I mentioned earlier, where we have high content biological data, and we're going to see if we can get that to get us closer to the causal biology. So let me give you an example of how that might work. This is a case study. It's just a really beautiful case study of psychiatric disease. This is a region on chromosome 16 called 16p11.2 that for whatever reason is subject to copy number alterations in the population relative to wild type. It's deleted in some people and duplicated in others. When it's deleted, there's a 75% probability of autism, and when it's duplicated, a 40% probability of schizophrenia. 25 genes in the region, no one knows which of them has that effect, up until a paper about 3 years ago from UCSF that took IPS lines from the deletion patients, the duplication patients, and normal controls, reverted them, differentiated them into neurons, and looked at them under a high-content microscope. And what you see is this, and even to the untrained eye, you can see that the neurons on the left look a lot bushier than the neurons in the middle, and the ones in the middle are a lot bushier than the really naked neurons on the right. There's a significant deficit, there's a significant increase of synaptic arborization on the deletion and a significant deficit on the duplication. So we don't know still what's causing, which of the genes in the region causes this, but this gives you a phenotype that you can now try in this IPS culture various interventions to see which of those reverts the phenotype from the unhealthy to the healthy state. So that gives rise basically to what we're doing at In Sitro. Can we do this at scale and using machine learning rather than manual looking at things under the microscope to get at what distinguishes unhealthy versus healthy cells of people with a lower or higher disease burden of genetic disease burden? So if you imagine these are cells that are embedded in a manifold like we talked about in the images side, you can imagine that just like in the image that I showed you before, you have clusters that look like clusters that are healthy that look the same, and you have different types of unhealthy clusters, each of which looks different, and those clusters will emerge by looking at the cluster diagram in the manifold, and we can now ask ourselves which intervention might revert an unhealthy to a healthy cluster. Now, what's important about this is that this manifold gives you two things. It gives you, first and foremost, a stratification of the segmentation of the patients into subtypes that might not be visible at the clinical level. The big transformation that happened in precision oncology was when we realized that breast cancer was not one disease. We were able to do that because we had a lot of molecular data from enough patients that were obtained from tumor biopsy samples of those patients. And we now know that a HER2 positive cancer is very different from a BRCA1 cancer, is very different from a triple neg cancer, and each of those is treated differently today, which is what's given rise to the tremendous advancements in treating cancer, not just for breast cancer, but for other cancers as well. Here, because we will have enough molecular data from enough different genetic backgrounds, these different clusters will emerge. And because we have a cell-based system that is very scalable and intervenable, we can ask what intervention, what drug might allow us to move from, say, the yellow cluster to the blue cluster. So let me give you just a couple of examples to show you that this actually works. This is work that came from our own lab. We've created massive data sets that look at different cells under different conditions with different genetics and so on. And this is just a few examples to show this. This is a bunch of cells, each of which were treated with a CRISPR intervention with targeting a different gene. And the question is, can you, just by looking at the cells, figure out the different genetics of those cells? And the answer is you can't. This is what the manifold looks like, and you can clearly see clusters that emerge, and this is a comparison to the state-of-the-art method that used an engineered set of features. This is a fairly subtle perturbation because it only touches one gene and it only reduces its activity by 20 to 40%. So the fact that you can get this level of performance is quite striking. I'm going to show you the one last one, which is very recent work. This is in a disease that we're working on called NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. It is a fatty liver disease whose prevalence in the population is becoming increasingly large because of the obesity epidemic and the type 2 diabetes epidemic. And it's going to become the largest cause of liver cancer and liver transplants in the next decade. So the question is, can you create a cellular phenotype for NASH that you can then screen for interventions that revert the phenotype? So this is a bunch of cells from NASH patients and controls, and you ask yourself which are the ones that are NASH and which are the ones that are different. I'm sure you can't tell the difference, but the important thing is neither can a trained cell biologist who studies NASH. And even when we highlight the ones that are NASH versus non-NASH, you kind of look at this and you say, I don't know. And that is exactly what they said. So we plugged that into a machine learning algorithm to distinguish Nash from non-Nash, and you can see a nice separation in the training set. What's more important is you can see a similar separation in the test set, and rigor of machine learning. This was not only done on a different set of patients, it was done on a different set of patients whose cells were obtained from a different vendor, just to make sure that we're not overfitting. And so this is what you get. And again, you can start to look at the embedding and see what insight that gives you in the biology. You can't tell that much from something of this size. But when you look at the highest ranked tiles that for the NASH versus the highest ranked tiles for the non-NASH, you can clearly see that it's latching onto a phenotype that corresponds to these green circles are lipid droplets. The big pink circle is the nucleus, lipid droplets that are at the nuclear membrane. And you can use attention models from the machine learning to look at what exactly was the network looking at by backpropagating through the network. And you can see that, in fact, in the NASH case, it was looking exactly for those lipid droplets at the nuclear membrane versus the non-NASH was looking at a diffuse signal. So wrapping up, there is what we're really building is an incredible data factory that uses all of those tools that I mentioned before: iPS cells, CRISPR, high content phenotyping, and with automation at scale to create massive amounts of biological data. On the other side, we're using techniques from statistical genetics and from data science and from machine learning to interpret those data, but these are not two separate things. These are two loops that feed into each other. All of the work that's done is done in interdisciplinary teams that work together like this to figure out what is the problem that we can solve together, what is the experiment that we need to perform, what assay do we need to build that really captures the biology, and what model do we build and what insight can we extract from the result. This type of interdisciplinary collaboration, I think, is absolutely critical in this space, and I think in other areas as well. The separation of data scientists into one side of the organization where data are thrown over the wall and results are thrown back over the wall is the wrong way to do data science. So just highlighting that for those of you, I think this is absolutely critical to success. So I'm going to take a big step back now. For the last minute or so of this talk, just mention why I think this is a really wonderful space to be in, this intersection of machine learning / data science with biology and health. If you look back at the history of science, there are, at different periods in history, one discipline that takes on an incredible rate of progress because of a new insight or a new invention or a new way of measuring things. In the 1870s, that discipline was chemistry, where we understood the periodic table and moved away from alchemy and trying to turn lead into gold. In the 1900s, that discipline was physics, understanding the connection between matter and energy and between space and time. In the 1950s, that discipline was computing, where we were able to use silicone chips to actually do calculations that up until that point, only a human, and sometimes not even a human, had been able to do. And then in the 1990s, there was an interesting bifurcation because two disciplines suddenly took on that incredible progress. One was the era of data, which is related to but different to computing. It includes elements of computing, but also of optimization, statistics, and neuroscience. The other era was that of biology, quantitative biology, where we moved away from a purely descriptive science of cataloging phenomena to really understanding the principles of what drives biological systems. And this was enabled by the tools that measure biology in a very quantitative way. Microarrays, the human genome, super resolution microscopy, and so on, all allowed us to really measure biology in unprecedented ways. but those two disciplines didn't talk much to each other. I think the next era that's coming upon us now is what I call digital biology. It's the ability to measure biology in unprecedented scale, detail, and fidelity. The ability to interpret what we measure using the tools of machine learning and data science, and the ability to take that insight and rewrite biology to do things that it wasn't meant to do. And that will have an impact in biomaterials, in agriculture, in energy, in the environment, and in human health. And I think that's an area which is a really exciting place to be, because I think that is the next big epoch of science. Thank you very much.
So, this was our first talk for today. I think it highlighted a lot that we heard already in the beginning from the welcome words, and like how important interdisciplinarity is, how important high quality data are, and a lot of stuff. And we will come back to that after the break, because we have then the challenge section, what are challenges in data science, and we will discuss this topic afterwards in the panel discussion. So I'm sure we will come back to this afterwards. So what's next? Next, now we start with our regional experts. So now the online stuff and the video streaming is over, and we will now come to the presentations here on site. And I'm really happy now to announce the next speaker, and it will be also a talk really related to what Daphne Koller told us already, how important data science is in medicine and healthcare. And our next speaker is Anita Kloos-Brandstetter. She's already there. We're just doing some technical stuff here, so therefore she's not joining me yet. She is a data scientist. She has a background in mathematics, so she studied mathematics and biology on the University of Innsbruck, at the University of Innsbruck. And during her doctorate thesis, she focused on the research of forensic genetics and mathematical algorithms for reconstructing human evolution. She will tell us something about that as well. And her habilitation is in human genetics, and now she is currently a professor of mathematics and statistics here at the Carinthian University of Applied Sciences. So she's a really regional expert here for us. And she, apart from her activity here as a lecturer, she's working on mathematical solutions for biomedical problems,
to get new data, get new solutions to biomedical problems. So when I say I'm a data scientist, I guess that's what my friend thinks that I do all day. My mom, she knows a little bit better because she sees me sitting in front of my laptop, so that's what she thinks that I'm doing. So this is what I think I do sometimes, especially when I try to tackle a new problem. But what I actually do, and I think my children can sign this, feels like this. So as a data scientist, we work with huge amounts of data, and we try to get what we can. So today's topics that I would like to focus on are somehow everyday problems, and I would like to show you how we try to model such problems also with data science and mathematics. So the first the first aspect I'm going to give is on a phenomenon that's called parodontalgia, which is oral pain that's being introduced by barometric pressure changes. And I would like to talk about genome-wide association studies. So let's start with parodontalgia. So some of you, as we are from Carinthia or surrounding countries, might know the phenomenon that when you go on a high mountain, your tooth starts aching, and could also happen when you're in an airplane. And this is a phenomenon that's been known for especially military personnel for a long time, but there has never been really genetic or epidemiologic evidence that there is really a biological background for this. So, my husband is a dentist, and when we both worked at the university clinics of Innsbruck, we drove to work, and well, 3 or 4 times in a year he said, today it's abscess weather. And I said, what is abscess weather? And he said, no, it's obsessed weather, I feel it, I'm coming home late, we're going to have many, many patients in our clinic today. I said, well, is there any evidence? And he said, no, I just feel it. So, you know, to data scientists, something that you can feel is nothing that you can prove. And so I talked to other dentists, and they said, yeah, today is obsessed weather. He's absolutely right. I have no idea what's obsessed weather. So, okay, some differing weather conditions, the lunar phase, for example, could, of course, in it. So, what we did, together with some doctoral students, is we collected all the data at the dental outpatient clinic over a period of 6 months. And I have a friend working at the Central Meteorological Station from Austria at the ZAMK, and he gave me all weather characteristics from Innsbruck over the same period of time. So I started analyzing the data, and we had more than 1,000 patients presenting with acute pain in the oral cavity. And, well, we saw a rise in caries and a decrease in acute apical periodontitis with increased atmospheric pressure, but there was no association of the total number of patients with atmospheric pressure, which was somehow surprising because this was the null hypothesis, right? And we did not see any influence of the moon either. So, moon and barometric pressure obviously were not responsible. So, still, there was the problem of this obvious abscess weather that all the colleagues were sure it existed. So, what I did next is I just plotted the absolute daily deviation from the mean atmospheric pressure and also the absolute daily deviation from the average patient flow on a time axis. And what I found was were these two lines on the upper plot, which somehow seemed to follow each other. So what I did next, and then here is when you put in your trick box as a mathematician, is you do some exponential smoothing, and all of a sudden, well, the two curves were really linked to each other. So what we saw is that the stronger the absolute deviation from the mean atmospheric pressure was, no matter what's positive or negative, just the absolute deviation, the more patients came to this outpatient clinic. And we published this in the European Journal of Pain, and we wanted to call it parodontalgia. And the reviewer said, no, you can't call that. This is not a scientific valid term. So we had to remove the term parodontalgia from our manuscript and also from the paper. And we had to call it barometric pressure-induced oral pain, which is of course not as fancy as parodontalgia, but turns out lots of other clinics, dental clinics, said, well, there's first evidence for abscess weather, and our study has been replicated many times since then, and now parodontalgia seems to be a common term that's been used all over. But at that time, we were not allowed to use it. So, getting away from everyday problems, I would like to talk about something that also Daphne kind of scratched a little bit in her talk about genome-wide association studies. When she talked about drug discovery and those drugs that finally made it to a clinical application, she said, well, those are those drugs that have some kind of a genetic background. And genome-wide association studies are used to find those very small genetic differences between individuals that influence the susceptibility to diseases, for example, or to other traits. So what is a complex trait? So let's look at this trait here. It's called the body mass index, which is inferred from your size and your weight. And of course, we have many different influence factors modulating the body mass index. But of course, why is this interesting? Because the extreme phenotypes of the body mass index, so for example, being very obese, leads to clinical conditions and disease traits that need our further medical attention. So why should we find these disease genes? Those genetic factors are particularly interesting because, unlike environmental factors, they are inherited at birth, they're essentially unchanging, and they're nowadays easily measurable. So this also makes the inference about causation particularly simple, because if you say, well, cyclists tend to be taller, the causation could possibly work either way. But people with a genotype AA on a certain genetic position tend to be taller. This really implies causation, because all else being equal in size. So inheritance is more or less nature's randomized controlled trial. So why do we look for disease genes? It's because we want to identify drug targets, or we want to predict the risk of getting a certain disease. For example, breast cancer. We already know that there are certain disease genes. When you're in a family, you have a case of breast cancer, you're being genotyped for those disease risk genes to know whether you're at risk too or not. Then also for personalized medicine, so you're stratified as a patient by your likely treatment response. And nowadays for gene therapy and, for example, this genomic surgery that also Daphne certainly wanted to give a glimpse at is with CRISPR technologies, where we can kind of cut out the disease-causing genes and replace them by healthy genes, which of course is a future vision, but still, at the first step, it's necessary to identify those disease-causing genes. So let's briefly talk about the circle of genetic causation. So we have in every cell in our body, we have our DNA, which is physically packed up into chromosomes. And inside cells, this DNA information is transcribed to form proteins and other molecules that affect how the cells behave, forming the different organs that combine to make up individuals, whose success, and with success I mean survival, is also affected by the traits that they have, and we call those the clinical phenotypes, the things that we can actually measure. And then, of course, we pass on our DNA with some likelihood of mutations and recombination to the new generation, where the circle of genetic causation starts again. And all of these different aspects can now be measured. So the question is, how do we get all this information together to extract the information? We need to know. So it's clinically useful and interesting to look for the genetic variants underlying diverse human traits. And the mapping of genetic traits is likely to be complex because of the complex processes involved. So it's practically like finding needles in the haystack. The human genome is 3.2 billion base pairs long, and we want to find a very small number of causal genetic mutations in there. But how are we going to do this? So luckily, our nature has given us a way to narrow down on specific regions of the genome. And why is this? This is because of recombination. So genetic recombination breaks up the DNA into segments. So you only inherit a mosaic of your parents' DNA. And how can we exploit this recombination? It's either through family studies, where we kind of sequence the entire genome of family trees with certain diseases and perform linkage studies. The pro is that there's not so many markers needed, but the con is that it's not a good resolution and will only work for rare mutations with strong effects. The other way to exploit recombination is to exploit the unobserved recombinations in a population sample, and this is done by genome-wide association studies. Those genome-wide association studies are all based on single nucleotide polymorphisms. We call them SNPs for short. And it's a substitution of a single nucleotide at a specific position in the genome that is present in a sufficiently large fraction of the population. So at least 1% of the population shows an alteration, a mutation at this very specific genetic position. Then it's called a single nucleotide polymorphism. These SNPs pinpoint to differences in our susceptibility to a wide range of diseases. They could also, what they do is they are associated with phenotypes. So for example, a single mutation, a single SNP is responsible for color, for eyes, which would then be our phenotype. But also the severity of illnesses and the way the body responds to treatments are also manifestations of these small but common genetic variations. So with association mapping, in a first step, we try to locate quantitative trait loci and to link the phenotypes, so the observable characteristics, for example, having blue eyes or brown eyes, having, for example, being obese to being underweight, or having a certain disease, or vice versa to being healthy for this disease, and groups of patients that have the disease, and just see how frequent this certain mutation is in either group. So for example, what we did based on the candidate gene approach is we found a genetic association of atherogenic uric acid concentrations. So high serum uric acid levels, they lead to gout. And they also have been reported to be associated with an increased risk of hypertension, obesity, the metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. So it's, of course, not good to have high serum uric acid levels. In former times, these high uric acid levels, as they are associated with gout, it was a problem of the rich people, because it's mainly a problem of being overweight and drinking too much alcohol, for example. So there was also a term in our society, it's called the Champagner-toe, the Champagnerzehe, which means your toes hurt because of the gout, which is caused by high uric acid levels. Now the question is it only environmental factors influencing the uric acid levels, or are there any genetic basis too? So what we had some candidate genes that we know are involved in the fructose transport, which have names like SLC2A9, ABCG2, or SLC17A3, all referring to those components of fructose transports in the cells. And we found out that they showed highly significant associations with uric acid levels. And these SNPs, so we only targeted 9 or 10 SNPs within these regions, but they were responsible and they explained more than 40% of variation in uric acid levels. And we found there is a genetic risk score. So the more, because uric acid is called an intermediate phenotype, okay? Rising uric acid levels are associated with certain diseases, but it's not an endpoint. When you do endpoint studies, is for example people having a stroke or having a heart attack. That's a clinical endpoint versus having a clinical intermediate phenotype. So we found that with every additional risk allele that you have, the uric acid levels rise. And this was especially strong in men compared to women, which was also a sex SNP interaction. I was very excited because this was the first time we found some kind of interaction between gender and genetic background. And we also found an interaction with age. So with increasing age, the interaction disappeared. So before, this was a candidate gene study. So we had a certain hypothesis of disease genes that we were looking at. But genome-wide association studies enable a hypothesis-free approach to disease gene discovery. Because it's an observational study of a genome-wide set of genetic variants in different individuals to see if any variant is associated with a certain trait. So GWAS typically focus on associations between SNPs and traits like major human diseases. And when we talk about SNPs, it's normally that every single patient or person in a population cohort is typed for 500,000 to 2 million SNPs in one go. So that's the biological part, and the data science part is to find the association between this huge amount of data and the quantitative traits. So genome-wide association studies typically identify common variants with small effect sizes. So this is what we see here on the right corner. Here we have common variants with small effect identified by GWAS, while if we have very rare variants causing strong effects, for example, the cystic fibrosis gene, it's one mutation, and if you have this mutation, you will have cystic fibrosis. So this is something that follows Mendelian inheritance rules. They are rare in the population, but they have very strong effects. While with GWAS studies, we are looking for common variants that have small effects. But adding all up those small effects, we are getting to the phenotypes and maybe also to clinical endpoints. So most common GWAS approach is a case control setup, which compares one healthy group and one case group affected by a certain disease. So all individuals are genotyped for the majority of common known SNPs. In most cases, it's more than 1 million SNPs. So for each of these SNPs, it is then investigated if the allele frequency is significantly altered between the case and the control group. So for example, if we look at SNP1, we see here the number of Gs has a frequency in the cases of 52.6%, while the count of Gs in the control group is only 44.6%. And if we compare this, we get a p-value of 5.0 times 10 to the power of minus 15. While the next SNP that we analyze is equally distributed between cases and controls. And what we do is we do this kind of multiple linear regression analysis, or also logistic regression, because we also include covariates like age and gender and known diseases, with all those millions of SNPs that we genotyped and the hundreds of thousands of samples that we have. And what we get in the end is a so-called Manhattan plot. Why is it called Manhattan plot? Because it somehow looks like the skyline of Manhattan. So that genomic coordinates are displayed along the x-axis. So what we here see on the x-axis are our chromosomes. Chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, until chromosome 22. The gender, the sex chromosomes are most commonly not included. On the y-axis, we have the negative logarithm of the association, p-value, for each SNP displayed on the x-axis. And because the strongest associations will have the smallest p-values, e.g. times 10 to the power of minus 15, the negative logarithms will be the greatest. And the different colors of each block usually shows the extent of each chromosome. So what we here also have is some kind, so when we look at this graph, we'll see, okay, this was associated with a certain trait, and we found some genes where the SNPs within these gene regions certainly show some very, very strong associations with a trait that we've observed. So this Manhattan plot depicts the results of hundreds of thousands of multiple linear regression models, with the independent variables being the genetic vectors, so the SNPs, and the covariates like age and gender, and the dependent variables being some certain diseases like breast cancer or traits like uric acid levels. And because we do hundreds of thousands of tests, we do also a Bonferroni correction for multiple testing, and the line here, the dotted line here, is the limit for the Bonferroni correction, giving the number of tests. So only SNPs that fall above the Bonferroni line will be closer analyzed. And by this approach, for example, we detected genetic variants that influence the blood pressure and the cardiovascular risk. Blood pressure, for example, is a heritable trait and responsive to environmental stimuli, and of course is associated with increased risk of cardiovascular events. And here we performed a GWAS on more than 200,000 individuals of European descent and identified 60 new loci to be responsible for diastolic and systolic blood pressure with both intermediate phenotypes to cardiovascular disease. But performing GWAS sometimes is not enough to detect all the genetic variants. So it's sometimes useful if you combine several GWAS, because no laboratory on Earth has hundreds of thousands of samples. So what you do is, if you want to find out those variants with small effects, you have to combine the data sets. And what we did is we performed a meta-analysis on 70,000 individuals of European ancestry and over 70,000 East Asian individuals. And we found new loci which were associated with kidney function and chronic kidney disease. So to end up, a genome-wide association study is an approach that involves rapidly scanning markers across the complete sets of DNA of many people to find genetic variations associated with a particular disease. This is from information on new genetic associations can then be used to develop better strategies to detect, treat, and prevent diseases. Those SNPs are particularly useful in finding genetic variations that contribute to common complex diseases, such as asthma, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, or mental illnesses. And so these GWAS findings provide new insights also to suggest potential new therapeutic pathways for cardiovascular disease prevention. So, given the monstrous quantity of data being produced in those studies and medicine, they are transforming our perception on the basic biogenic processes, clinical decision-making, and treatment decisions. Of course, sound data is the foundation to good decisions and good science. So the data science can change the healthcare sector in many ways. For example, from healthcare tracking to scheduling nursing shifts, for example, when there is obsessed weather, the data analysis backs up a value-based, data-driven approach. So this data science healthcare is a key feature for how we can approach and use medicine in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita, for this very interesting talk. We learned about weather and the influence of weather on toothache and on how important genes are in discovering what are the effects of diseases. And I think it fits perfect to the talk of Daphne before and also to the whole COVID-19 situation we have currently now, that everybody tries to understand this disease. And I think they look already at genes a lot. So there will be a lot in this direction. Yes. Now we would have time for one or two quick questions, just an announcement how we do this. Christoph will go around with the microphone and will hold the microphone to you if you want to pose a question. Please don't grab the microphone on your own, just for contact reasons. If you're sitting in one of the middle seats and you cannot access this, either you pose your questions without microphone and Christoph will repeat it, or you put on your mask, come out, and then ask your question. So this is how we try to do this setup. Are there any questions to Anita in the room? Up there?
Okay, so Anita, you spoke about the barometric pressure for oral pain. Yes, and I wanted to know whether the predictive model you guys built have been built into any products that are being used in any hospitals right now, because you said some hospital people actually had some experience with what you were talking about. So has it been built into any products yet? And then the second question I have is that did your research also reveal any patterns in actual seasons or times of the year that these obsessed weathers happen and when the pains actually happen in people's mouths? So.
Thank you very much for the question. So, to your first question, until you can really apply this into clinics, you need to have also good reasons. And the Japanese working group just recently found the cells responsible for parodontalgia. So now that also not only the cause, but also the causation is known. So the cells that kind of are getting irritated, then this is very important because then you know, okay, it can be treated, for example, with medication that reduces the pain easily. As the weather is so hard to predict, it's also hard to kind of schedule this into clinical circumstances, but of course it has been applied, as I know in Germany, in different clinics where they are more prone to this fluctuation to get their schedules more close into the ambulances and less onto the station. And what was your second question?
So whether your research revealed any patterns in terms of seasons or times of the years when this
No, we did not see any association with this. It was as common in winter as in summer. While I have to say Innsbruck has very special weather conditions. We have a phenomenon called the Föhn, which is a very warm wind followed by very bad weather that also causes headache in many patients. So I think Innsbruck is also a city especially prone to diseases or pain reportings based on changing weather conditions.
Another quick question because we're close, but one it's okay. Then the other ones we shift to the networking break. Yeah.
Hi Anita, my question is we have so many online genome sequencing ventures. Mm-hmm. Can you recommend anyone that could be we could call real and could be believable? And then is the data of all this, the database is available for public? We could play around and look at it or something like that.
So yeah, this is an important question and I'm being asked this very frequently. So there are many, many services now that are being offered for a few dollars, a few euros, where you can send in your DNA, which is especially only a swab of your mouth, so you don't need blood or anything, and you send in, and what you get is also your genetic ancestry. So this is what I've been working on many, many times, because you were asking about products. Well, as a scientist, you live from publications, but one of my developments in software is actually now being used by many companies, and I did not do any patent. So if this is one take-home message where you patent your work before you publish, and on mice, I would not recommend it, because you don't know what your data is being used for. And also the results that you get can be so misleading. So I get emails from patients or from friends telling me, oh my God, I got a disease gene for breast cancer, I'm going to get breast cancer soon. Because they just genotype throughout your entire genome, also passing coding regions, but without the accompanying information, this can be very misleading. And also, of course, you cannot be sure about the quality that you get. So when you access data, you want to collect data, I would especially recommend the NCBI homepage, where you can download genomes that have been validated, but I would not send in my own DNA to a company to get it genotyped or do the ancestry status.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, with that, we are on, we're finished with the talks, but I would like to stretch your attention for another 10 minutes, although we are already close to the networking break. I know everybody's looking forward to another coffee, but I think 10 minutes is still okay, because I would like to present you something in my own interest also. I would like to talk to you about AI Carinthia. Anybody in the room knows about or heard about AI Carinthia before? Some few ones, of course, the one I told before because I forced it. Yeah, it's an initiative we decided to start end of last year, so it was November 2019, where we said we would like to do something, we would like to take responsibility as data scientists or data science enthusiasts in Carinthia and show something to the public about AI. What is AI? What are the risks with AI? Because many people fear what happens with the algorithms because they don't understand it. It's complex. Also, some data scientists do not understand some complex algorithms, so you cannot understand everything. And we said, yes, we would like to start an initiative here and bring it more to the public, say, what can we do with AI, where we use already today AI. So it's in a lot of gadgets that you use it not intentionally, and we want to focus on that. We want to reach out to students and so on to really make it more grabbable. And if I say we, these are the 10 fighters for AI Carinthia. Yeah, these are the 10 people who said, okay, let's do something. We now try to do something. Of course, COVID-19 somehow delayed everything that we started because it was especially, so in January, February, we said, okay, now let's start. And then suddenly everything was locked down and we said we don't want to really start online. But anyhow, now we will start online because situation will not change anyhow. Okay, so what are we planning to do? There's a lot to do. You can do so much in AI, in the field of AI, but we focused really on 3 areas. The first area we focused on is small and medium enterprises, because this is a very crucial industry in Carinthia, in our region. And the problem for small and medium enterprises is, of course, they cannot afford a data scientist. The data scientist is not such a low-paid worker, let's say it like this. So welcome that if you are in this profession, congratulations. But somehow the small and medium enterprises, they need this link to the data scientists. And therefore we said we want to be the bridge, we want to link data scientists with small and medium enterprises. So there are a lot of freelancers in this area. You can just just book them for some hours and then you have your things done. Of course, in some hours, in data science, nothing is done, maybe some weeks, let's say it like this. But this is what one focus we will put on, and actually this is the main focus of Fraunhofer Austria, to do this work. And Fraunhofer Austria, as you may know or not, they have a new location in Klagenfurt, focusing really on AI, and Eva Egeling is the head there. And if you are interested in this topic, please contact her. She's the contact person from AI Carinthia for small and medium enterprise topics. So they will do trainings and education stuff and linking. Second part is education. Of course, it's important to reach out to the schools and to the students to really force not only women in data science, but to also say, okay, encourage young people to go into this field because it's important. We heard this today a lot already. And this is also something we want to do. Walter Ogres, he sits here in front. He's the one responsible for this topic. He started already this year in summer, a summer internship working group, let's say it like this. So it's an initiative. We had 8 students this year, really from high schools and from university level, master level, who'd exchanged knowledge in this field. And we will continue this. So the idea is here not only to do experience sharing between the young students already, because the network building is already important at this age. We also have mentoring from AI experts, so some people do something in AI but do not have the surrounding in their company because the network is not there yet, and the AI Carinthia network can support here. And of course the personal network is also important. Yeah, go and chat with Walter afterwards in the coffee break. There will be another summer internship next year, so we will continue this initiative. If you have planned to have some summer interns in the field of data science, AI, feel free to contact Walter and be part of the initiative. And the third one, this is more or less why we started also a bit the women in data science. We want to reach out to AI practitioners. So people working, interested in the field of data science, to connect with each other. We are a rural region, connection is not always so, or networking is not always so easy, But this is why we started this. So this should be not only something for women. As I said in the beginning, we want to reach out to the whole community, to start the networking, to start the exchange. And of course, the 10 people I showed you before, we have the connection also to other Austrian networks in the field of AI, to European networks, and we want to link this together. But first, we would like to focus a bit on the regional network here. And yeah, contact persons. It's first contact person, it's me, myself. But as you may notice, I don't know, you may notice, will have a baby break. And during my baby break, Bruno and Walter would take over. So also go to Walter or write him an email to know more what we plan to do here. What do we plan exactly? So what is really the next step we do some data talks. We will start online now due to the situation, of course. This will be something quite familiar to the second part, or quite similar to the second part of the conference today. We will invite local companies to share their experience in data science, what they do, how they deploy it, how they use it, what are the challenges, and then afterwards we'll have networking and discussions, either a panel discussion or coffee discussion, whatever. And this is the format we would like to do. We will start soon. There's no date yet, but we will start online, and Walter will keep you informed. We have from all of you the contact. Most of you, or maybe all of you, I do not have the statistics now in my mind, accepted to have more information about AI Carinthia, so you will get the notification for the first data talk soon. Yeah, and that's actually, this is what we plan to do. And of course, if you think now, wow, great, this is the thing I waited for months already, please join us. So we do not have to be 10, we can be 20, we can be how many people who would like to join, as many, more people, we will have more impact here in the region. And 3 people are here, so also Jürgen Pilz from University of Klagenfurt is up there, and we are in the networking break. Feel free to contact us if you want to join, if you want to support, if you have some ideas. We are happy to talk to you. And with that, happy coffee break. Enjoy your coffee, and yes, keep the distance, as I said before, wearing masks until you have your coffee, and then go outside. If it's not raining, I hope it stopped raining meanwhile. And we meet back at 11 for the second part of the conference, focusing on the challenges for data scientists, which are many. Thanks. Okay, welcome back. To the second part of Women in Data Science, Villach conference. Just a short announcement for people watching online. I'm really sorry that we had some technical issues with the live stream. It should be fixed now, so you should really have no interruption again. But we have the recording, we will post, so there will be the link to the YouTube videos, and you can watch the videos that were interrupted afterwards. Of course, we will manage that, but sorry for the inconvenience for that, for the online crowd. Okay, now everything is fine, so now you're really recorded here, everybody. And we will start now with the second part. And the focus of the second part is a bit different one. So we had now the biomedicine healthcare section, and now we'll go more into the challenges. Of course, they are in biomedicine and healthcare, similar to industry, but we will now focus really on industry challenges. And we invited Hilda from Crayon to give us some examples at the beginning, to have some teaser for the panel discussions we start afterwards. And as we heard in the talks from Daphne and also from Anita before, there are many challenges. I think we will discuss some of them. We will not come to an end for sure, because we could talk for days about challenges that we face. But yeah, I would like to invite you to have an interactive session afterwards. So now we will have the teaser talk from Hilda, and then afterwards we will go to a panel discussion. It should not only be a discussion in the panel, it should be discussion, questions from you, from the audience, between the panel, whatever. So everything is allowed. Just feel free to ask your questions afterwards. Okay, so with that, I would like to introduce Hilda Kosoros. She's sitting here in front of me, and yeah, she's a computer scientist, has a PhD in computer science and 5 years experience in R&D in AI. So she worked at the Johannes Kepler University Linz, and afterwards she moved to 5 years in industry. Among others, she worked for Rantastic in this time. I think the company is well known to everybody. And now currently she's working at Crayon as an AI advisor. She will tell us what an AI advisor at Crayon is, what is her daily work. And she focuses in her research on counterfactual learning, causal inference, sequential pattern mining, and time series analysis. And we're happy that you're here and give us some insights about, I would switch, about some experiences and lessons learned about how to deliver impactful AI solutions. Welcome on stage, Hilda.
Thank you. Also, thank you for the warm welcome and for the nice introduction. It's an honor to be here, although a small crowd, nevertheless, I get more attention from you guys. So I would like to just say a few words about Crayon before I get started into the topics that I would like to talk about today. So Crayon actually has a long history, and it's a global company with roots in Oslo, basically working in software asset management and optimizing costs for their customers. But recently, and when I say recently, since Crayon has 20 years of age, recently means 6 years for us, we started investing into AI, and we built a center of excellence in AI in Oslo, and currently also recently in Vienna. So I'm part of the Vienna team, and I'm an AI advisor. And what I usually do on a daily basis is I translate, not in normal languages that you guys know and learn, but I translate what the customer wants, their business requirements, into AI solutions and how to solve those problems using AI solutions and data, and everything that comes with that. So today I would like to talk a bit more about that glass half empty. Until now, I think there was a lot of presentation and talk going on about how full this glass is and how interesting and colorful the water in it is. But today I would like to give you a new perspective, or a different perspective on this matter, and talk a bit more about the glass half empty. And I don't want to be negative about it. I consider myself more a realist. But I want you to use this opportunity to be prepared for what comes out there when, I don't know, you finish your studies or you work with other customers from the industry. So I would like to share with you today our lessons learned. And the work that I will present is actually a work that I have worked on together with two of my colleagues. We even published a paper on this topic together with Florian Rosenberg and David Mosen. So we worked together with multiple customers from various industries, and we have gathered all these learnings and put them together into, of course, this presentation, but also into a paper. And I would like to talk about only half of the challenges that we have discovered, and the rest of them, of course, we can also talk about in the break, or you can read the paper. So let's get started. You probably heard this sentence already many times, and you already see it. You have seen it also in the presentations today, that AI is affecting a lot of areas in our lives and is going to affect them even more. So you see AI not just in, let's say, innovative areas that are going on nowadays, self-driving cars and so on, but you see them even in the more, let's say, low-level industries that maybe previously or a few years ago you couldn't have imagined that AI could be applied in these industries. So AI is really going to shape everything that we do. I truly believe that, and I think everyone nowadays has been at least in contact with one AI algorithm. And the reason why this is happening, and especially recently has been developing even more in this direction, is because there are some key enablers that made this possible. On one hand, big data. Previously, when I used to work in research, having data available was a huge topic, and the more data you could gather, the better. But then also it's the topic of high quality data. So now what we're facing is an exponential increase in data, and we're talking about big data. But most of the time what happens is that the quality is exponentially decreasing most of the time as well. The other topic that's happening and it's enabling all these developments are actually the algorithmic advances, and you have seen also in the presentations today how much is going on in research. I cannot believe how much has changed, for instance, in NLP. When I started my studies, working on my PhD, I used to work with bag of words and TF-IDF, and nowadays we're talking about advanced language models that can answer questions just like that without even having to train a model for that. So it's really amazing what's going on. So this has definitely contributed to all these, to all this push that's going on also in the industry. And thirdly, of course, is the technology. Cloud having compute power available because all these models and data need heavy computation. So of course, this allows us to develop also real-life use cases and implement them and make them available for people. However, what we notice is in the industry something different. And while I was listening to the wonderful and inspirational talks today, I had to make a trip back into my past when I was still working in research, and just a picture came into my mind that I just couldn't get rid of. So I imagined, while I was working in research, I imagined that this life in research is like a theatrical stage where you need to make a performance. So everything that happens backstage is all the research and the people that are doing like the heavy lifting, and they're trying to train, they make mistakes, then they get up again and do it again. And then when you go on stage, actually, which should be when you go to apply it into real life, it should be the perfect performance. It should be the piece of art that should reveal actually the competence of those people. So when I moved from research into the industry, I had the feeling, okay, I trained enough on my performance. I think I learned quite a lot, and I wanted to make a difference, and I went on the stage. And what I've seen is, I don't know how to explain it, and please don't take it wrong, but to make this discrepancy clear, in backstage we were working with complicated technologies, and you go there on the stage and you see kids playing with Lego pieces. So it's very hard to explain what I'm talking about, but I think the challenges that I will present today will make everything even clearer what I mean by that. And this shouldn't discourage you. For me personally, it makes my daily work even more interesting, and I'm more passionate about it because I can make that much of a difference, since there is so much work to do, right? So I want you, while I'm talking about these challenges, I want you to be inspired, and I will also try to guide you in how to overcome these challenges. So let me start off with actually this discrepancy that we're seeing in the world nowadays. So yeah, there is a lot of research going on, but what we're noticing in the industry is a lack of understanding of AI. And this comes, of course, from the from the fact that not everyone is studying in their studies AI, mathematics, and computer science to understand the inner workings. And because they don't understand it, they also have sometimes a naive picture about how to apply AI and what it can do. Then there are companies that are just moving into this AI rush, so because everyone is talking about it, they don't want to miss out, the competition is ahead, they heard the competition is hiring a lot of data scientists, so they're just rushing into this without first thinking about it and making a plan around it. The other part is not thinking about the implications of AI, so thinking about fairness, bias, the robustness of algorithms. What happens when I put into production one of these AI algorithms? Thinking about what is the difference between software, general software, and AI as software. And then what we see a lot, I can say, I don't know, 95% of the customers we're working with are usually stuck in this prototypical phase. So they have data scientists, they apply some data science, but they're still like in the Stone Age when it comes to actually making AI a reality. And then, of course, the reason for this, they're not equipped. They don't have the necessary tools, the right tools. And what I mean by tools, not just technically, but also they don't have the resources in order to deploy these kinds of solutions. So as I mentioned, my colleagues and I worked on these 12 challenges that we documented and nicely described in this paper. Today, I will only go through half of them. Like I mentioned, we nicely grouped them into 3 categories: the organizational challenges, business and technical challenges. And I will take from each of them at least one example so that you also understand why we made this kind of grouping. So the typical customer that we see, and I would like to picture this in front of you before we start talking about the actual challenges so that you understand where our understanding of these challenges comes from, is usually a customer that comes, of course, from production industry. Again, I'm talking about the prototypical customer. Of course, a global company with a lot of employees. Their core business is, of course, not digital since they come from the production industry. And the customer has already started investing into AI. They have at least a strategy, or they know they want to do AI. Usually this is the level that they are, and start already investing in hiring data scientists. They also have, of course, let's say an IT team that is doing management of IT infrastructure. But what they have reached so far is usually just at the prototypical level that data scientists have experimented with some algorithms, with some data. And they're facing currently the challenge of making these AI algorithms generate continuous value, not just one-off. And of course, such industries are highly affected by situations like COVID, because as soon as such a dramatic experience hits us, AI is not anymore on the agenda. So currently what I see also a lot happening is that AI is not part of the core business, which means that if we can spare some costs, AI will be the first topic that goes off the list. So let me start off with the first challenge, and this challenge comes from the organizational aspect. We call this challenge allow your organization to evolve with the AI growth. So what we see currently is, because I mentioned the fact that companies who start off in this area are usually affected by this AI rush. And what such companies do is generally just either hire a recruitment company, or because they don't understand AI themselves, they hire data scientists based on without the knowledge of what kind of data scientists they actually need. Like, what kind of skill set would I want to see in my data scientist? Because, as you might know, there's not one flavor of data scientist, but there are many different flavors. So they do this without understanding what kind of skill set they need. And what happens then, it's very sad for the data scientists. I've been in this position myself. They get isolated. Somewhere sitting in a lab, in a corner, trying to do something with data, building some models, and as soon as they come up with something really interesting, they present it. I did that myself. There's a lot of emotion, and there is a lot of enthusiasm from the rest of the company, but then nothing happens. So usually this project is put on a shelf, and then we move on to the next project. So what happens from this kind of problems is that there is an underperformance, because you're hiring this team, right? They're paid usually very well, as you have heard already today. And of course, you don't have your return on investment. So companies are saying, there's no point to invest anymore in AI because we don't get anything from it. And of course, on the other hand, you have also unhappy teams, and the data scientists leave because there's no change happening. So what are our recommendations to you, audience, and also to customers who are investing into this topic? Be proactive in the sense that try to understand before you invest into this topic, what is it that you actually need, and be proactive also along this journey to adapt, because things change. The organization will change, and also the needs of your business will change. So be proactive in understanding where do you need to place the people, the data people, along the, within the organization and business in order to have the highest impact. And then, of course, you need to also think about how do you educate the rest of the organization to embrace this culture, to welcome these new data people that should bring new insights about the business and new insights about the products that they're working on. And have this proactive mindset as an alertness. So be flexible enough that whenever you notice that something is not working, be flexible enough to change those things, observe that things, and see how you can adapt the organization accordingly. So this is what we mean by an evolving organization with AI. So as AI grows in the organization, so should the rest of the organization change. This was one of the organizational changes. I will move on now to the business challenges. And here I would like to start off with actually one of my favorite. It might be weird. Most of the challenges I will present today are technical, because I think technical aspects are also important. However, my favorite ones, and I'm saying favorite not because I enjoy that they're challenges, because I enjoy tackling the challenges. And I would like to start off with this one. User experience is key. And I've worked in a heavy product-oriented company, Runtastic, as you heard already. And I learned this the hard way. So I wish during my studies, and I wish while I was preparing for this job, that I knew this fact. I actually had to learn it on the job and making mistakes. So what happens normally is that because this data scientist is isolated, what happens is that a model is developed first, and then we think what to do about it. And instead of thinking about it the other way around, where is the actual problem, understanding how to solve this actual problem without even thinking yet about AI technologies, because most of the time maybe AI is not even needed, and then start developing on that AI algorithm. This is a huge problem that I see even nowadays, and I'm struggling even with it because every time it shows up, depending on with which customer you work, in a different way. So it's not easy to spot this problem. The effect of this challenge, because you don't think about how it will be used then in practice, is that at the end, doesn't have any impact. So imagine if you build something that you haven't thought of how it will impact the end users, then of course it's not really usable, and that's why it ends up in the garbage or somewhere on a shelf with collecting a lot of dust. And this also leads, of course, to a mismatch between what the customer needs or what the end user needs from that AI solution and what, let's say, the data scientists thought that they will need. So in this case, our recommendation is always consider also about the user experience when you're thinking about AI. And I like to make this analogy of most of the time what happens is that companies start off with an AI idea of implementing, for example, churn prediction or recommender system because it's cool, everyone is doing it. I mean, we're a retail company, we have to do it as well because someone else did it. But what is the problem? And when you go and you take them a step back and you ask them what is the actual problem that you want to solve, they don't know what that problem is. And afterwards, let's assume that you do have the problem and you did identify the right solution to solve that problem. Make the journey back. After you implemented that solution, take a step back and ask yourself, is this solution actually solving my initial problem? We go only so to speak, sequentially with these steps and never look back. And this is actually one of the, let's say, the challenges that also is reflecting what I'm presenting today, because usually there is a disconnect between the problem that you're trying to solve and the solution that you are implementing. So formulate a clear problem statement, validate that solution with the idea, but always go back and ask yourself again, did I really solve that problem? Because most of the time it happens that it's actually not. We were too enthusiastic about that idea and new algorithm that we have developed, and then it ends up not being usable. The next challenge is adopt a meaningful and reliable validation strategy. And those who are working in data science know that there are performance metrics, and you have a test data set or a validation data set, and you really have to have a great performance on your validation data set in order to make it to production. I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about the business validation, because we are in the business challenges area. So yes, as a data scientist, you need to have a high accuracy or a recall or precision, whatever metric you might choose. But what is not clear is that after these solutions are put into production is that, again, you need to validate whether you're actually having an impact with that solution. And I must say, oftentimes it happens that it's not. I worked on algorithms that were so performant, so insightful. It was showing very interesting patterns about the running behavior of the users. And everyone was impressed. However, when we tried to use that model and try to have an impact on the behavior of the users, we realized we don't know how to use it because it was brand new information and we didn't know how to validate it. So while you're developing your idea and on your way to productionalize it, think about it, how will I know that this is actually bringing value? So think about a validation strategy. This can be an A/B test, this can be an interview with the end users. In any way or form, be creative, but validate also the impact that you're expecting with your solution. And for this, of course, if you want to validate, define some KPIs, so key performance indicators. And my experience is usually people try to define multiple, because if you, let's say, if you deploy then an A/B testing, if you have multiple key performance indicators, then at least one of them will do well. So at the end, it will be green, so everyone will be happy. But it's very misleading, and it's not helping anyone improve if we're just trying to be positive. And my approach is, let's try to be realist about how things actually are. Define one KPI, and at the end of the test, say, was this good? Did it work, or did it not work? And then, of course, the other recommendation is learn from it. Most often it happens that you develop the solution and then it doesn't have the impact that you want. Everyone is sad, okay, let's move on to the next topic. But what have we learned from this experience? Why didn't it work? Did we miss something? And then iterate on that and try to improve. It's very important. Otherwise, there's no learning, and yeah, we stay at the same level of knowledge. Now to the technical challenges, also very interesting, and I think a lot of work is being done currently on these topics, and I think not many organizations are aware that they have to invest into these technical challenges. They think that it's enough to hire data scientists. So the first one I would like to address is good data needs a good infrastructure. So of course, if you want high quality data to train your models on, think also about how you would like to collect this data, how you would like to structure this data, how you want to ensure that the data that you give in the hands of your analysts or data scientists is high quality enough in order to ensure also successful models. So we see currently limited access to data, siloed data sources all over the place, differently structured without a link between them, dirty data, so everyone who has worked with data knows what I mean, large volumes and also unstructured data. And what happens then, of course, because you don't have these resources, this infrastructure, is of course data scientists are working locally on their machines, on the models. So our recommendation is to invest early on into a data and machine learning platform. And nowadays, there is not much of a difference between these two things, a data platform and machine learning platforms. They are becoming more and more interconnected. And have a clear strategy where towards you want to develop yourself on this data platform. The second challenge, the technical challenge, is production deployments required an engineering mindset. So it might shock you that 50 to 85% of prototypes don't make it to production. And this happens because there is a lack of engineering quality in the implementation. Why is that? Because data scientists are not trained to be software engineers. And either, depends on how you want to evolve your company, either then you train your data scientists to have engineering skills, at least the engineering mindset, or work together in an interdisciplinary team with data engineers or software engineers to deploy these solutions. And of course, it's important, nevertheless, to have software engineering best practices. And this is one of the major reasons we see that machine learning solutions don't make it into production. And then managing models beyond the initial deployment. I think there is a lack of experience, and this is why this challenge is not well known, because if 85% of models don't make it to production, then of course there's a lack of knowledge of what to do after I productionalize the solution. So what happens after this stage, if you have experienced it maybe, is that over time models can become stale or not relevant anymore, not robust to the new data that is coming in. So there is a discrepancy between the data that the model was trained on versus the data that it's coming in. So of course we're dealing with problems like concept drift or training versus inference queue. And in this case, adopting monitoring mechanism to understand when this happens, not just that to identify them, but also to implement automatic mechanisms to deal with this problem. When I should do retraining, and when I do retraining, how can I ensure that if I immediately deploy that model, it's also robust, it's also highly performant, and it also meets the business needs. So have these things in mind because they're highly important. I would like to add a couple of references to very good papers related to this topic. I highly recommend them if you're thinking about how machine learning solutions should work into production and what are the major challenges. I think these papers are, let's say, two important pillars to understand this challenge. And I think both of them are written by Google employees, if I'm not mistaken. Some closing thoughts. As you have seen, there are many open challenges, of course. The answers to these challenges are not straightforward. You don't find them in handbooks or somewhere online on a blog post, I can guarantee that. But nevertheless, where I would recommend to start is first awareness. And this is the first step, at least me trying to create this awareness around me so that more people are aware of these challenges and know how to deal with them. And then simply take small steps. There is no, like I said, there's no tool stack or a set of skills that immediately solve the problem. It's just about trying things out, taking the first small steps, and then learn from those mistakes, and then iterate and try again. And don't give up, right? Any questions?
Yes, so any questions to Hilda from the audience?
Maybe I answered all the questions.
I think you just made a lot of question marks because for me, a comment on this, so it's actually, I agree with everything that you said. We, from Kai, then in the panel discussion, we will come to it. I'm pretty sure that we experienced all of this. And this is also, somehow it summarizes very well our conclusions about what we are facing daily. And this one thing, how to channelize this excitement about AI and that everybody wants to apply it, and then how to say, okay, let's bring it down to earth and let's productionize it. I think this is really one of the main challenges. And yeah, if there are no questions, we can just go over to the panel discussion, because I think it was a very nice introduction to a lot of questions and challenges that we have. So yeah, you can stay here directly. So every panelist gets his own microphone. I invite the other two panelists, so Anita and Anya, on stage. Yeah, how do we do this now? The panel discussion, yeah, I will switch to the panel discussion. Yeah, the topic is how to deploy data science methods in industry, pitfalls and challenges. So exactly the topic Hilda was talking about. I do not have to introduce all our panelists, so Anita and Hilda you know already. The third panelist is Anja Zernik from KAI. She is my colleague. We work together at KAI. She's a data scientist. She has experience in coordination of national and European funding projects in the area of data science. Yeah, KAI, as you may know or not know, is a research center owned by Infineon Technologies just next door, so we're in the next building. And Anja has a PhD in technical mathematics from the University of Klagenfurt and focuses her research on development of methods and algorithms for semiconductor industry. Of course, KAI is a 100% owned company from Infineon Technologies, therefore we focus on semiconductor industry. And with her research, she tries to increase the value chain, the data value chain, and to increase the process stability in semiconductor industry. To that, you may notice that one panelist is missing. Eva Engeling unfortunately cannot join. She apologizes, but I think we have a very nice setup for the panel discussion now. And as I said before, I would like to have it interactively, so we will start with some initial statements from all of you to this topic, and then whenever you want to pose a question, just raise your hand. Christoph will come to you, as I said before. Also you as panelists, you can ask the other panelists. However, we just start a discussion. We have approximately 45 minutes for that. Okay. Yes. Just one, before I ask you for your first statements, I just want to introduce why I chose this topic, because we heard it already from Hilda, but for me it's really, if you're at data science conferences and they are really academic driven, you always hear this share 80 to 20% of your work. I don't know how many heard this already, like 80% is data cleaning, like preparing your data, and then you have 20% fun applying the algorithms. That's true, but actually there's one part missing, and it's all the deployment, because nobody talks about this, how to maintain your model, how to deploy it and everything, and actually this is at least 30% of your work. So the share cannot be 80-20, it must be something like 50-20-30, something like this, but about the 30% deployment nobody talks about normally in the academic world, as you said before. And therefore I selected this topic. Yeah, it's important to really gain something, to have a return of invest. And I think there are so many challenges, and as you highlighted already in your talk, it's not only technical one, there are ethical questions you have to solve, there are business questions and so on, and let's see how many of them we will address now in this panel. So, to start with, I don't know who of you would like to start with the initial statement about your personal experience. What have you faced already? What kind of challenges you know? And what are for you the main challenges in this field? I think maybe not Hilda, because she stated her point of view already, but
maybe I could start to comment something what Hilda already said. So I also totally agree on every statement you made, because you really spoke from my heart and my soul. I experienced all these challenges on my own. And maybe to make, I can just emphasize some parts you already tackled in your talk. It's globally spoken the readiness of the industry for AI methods itself. So it's really kind of dependent how digitalized and automated the industry itself already is to be ready to implement all these AI methods, I would say. And as you also said, it's not just the data scientists working on the implementation and deployment of all that stuff. It's a kind of total value chain which has to be considered with different stakeholders involved into this whole process, because a data scientist should somehow cover more parts than just applying analytical stuff. It's also a huge computer science background needed on that, and even more the domain knowledge, because I encountered most often, if I'm providing results and I'm not talking the language of my customer, they are not that enthusiastic about these results as I am. So therefore, another thing maybe I also want to emphasize, you already said it, maybe focus on the customer. And to come back to your nice example on being behind the stage and on the stage, I think on the stage, the big difference is that there is also some audience. And the audience is in that case maybe our customer, and we should perform for them and not for ourselves. But as I also said, doing this job all on your own is also not possible. So being isolated is one of the worst things for deployment in general, I would say. So as I already said, different stakeholders are involved into this whole chain of consisting of methods and also data and so on. And yeah, these are two important things I want to emphasize again. Maybe just a third thing, then another comment is also welcome, regarding data. So every industry is telling, yeah, I do have a lot of data, but actually you also touched it. Collection of data should be also kind of structured. So all the historical data available at different companies have been collected for a special purpose. But this purpose, I'm quite sure, was in most of the cases not the one that we could easily apply our machine learning techniques on it. So therefore also thinking on how to collect the data, how to store it and so on is a kind of prerequisite. Just storing data is not enough to really have a flawless application of the AI algorithm then afterwards. And of course also giving feedback in the language the customer is really understanding. So different stakeholders involved in this scenario which have to be considered. So I think I stop at that point. I have to say much more, but
you can continue afterwards. We still have time.
Might be a good idea.
Okay.
Well, I think as working as a data scientist, we all make similar experiences. And what I do mainly, as you have already seen from my talk, I do a lot of statistics and data modeling for medical purposes. So what I normally get is data from clinics, and I work with the data. And I try to model, for example, disease pathways or treatment options. And when I go back with my results, I always get, oh wow, that's so great, let's do this. And you never hear from the person again, for example. Or they try to publish it, but when they try to publish it, it needs to be as simple as possible. So talking about Lego pieces, sometimes this fits very well. So that's also a main point when you work in isolation, and this is something that we all know and are confronted with. Because you do your part that you're familiar with, is data analysis, data modeling, and then you go back with the results to the stakeholder or to the medical doctor, and then all the complicated process that has been behind getting the result needs then to be visualized in very, very easily understandable graphs. And I think this is also something that we should focus on. It's of course important to know all the programming language and to know what kind of algorithms and Bayesian models we can apply and Markov chains and I don't know what. But in the end, what we get needs to be depicted in a very, very simple and easily accessible way. And this is also something where I think we should also focus our own education on, is to get more emphasis also on the visualization and on the selling of our product, so that we're no longer the girl or the woman in the dark office with the computer in front, but say, okay, now this is what you wanted from me, and this is what you got. And this is as simple as the question was in the beginning, because we never get difficult questions. Normally we get easy questions. This is our problem in the clinic, we collected the data, what is the consequence? And so it's probably also for us knowing what we did, but it's not necessary to show our other people what we all know and what we did and what we can. It's more getting the closer connection to the one who asked for the analysis and to give him a feedback that's correct yet simple to understand. And I think also for me it's something that I'm still learning. And where I would like also to get additional input, sometimes when I see a graph that's really fascinating, and I know, okay, in the background lots of analysis have been going on, but still the result is so easily to understand that you don't need 1,000 words to explain. I think then we are there where we want to go.
I think this is like trying to show how the complexity of the network or everything that we developed, we would like to put formulas and how complicated it was, and it took me months to do this.
Yes.
But in the end, who cares? They, of course they care, but they do not want to know every single step. They want to know, does it work or not?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay. I totally agree.
I think I already gave away my statement, but I will get back to it. Maybe it wasn't obvious enough. So, of course, there are many challenges in deploying AI models. My favorite one, again, not because it's the most important one, but I find it at the moment the most challenging one. So if you imagine a funnel of all the different ideas and the AI algorithms that go into it, and at the end, the one that makes it into production, the funnel at the end is very narrow. So the challenge I'm talking about addresses this funnel at already the early stages, because if we try early on to avoid failure, then of course we have more chances towards the end of the funnel to succeed. And the beginning of the funnel is actually identifying the right problem and the right solution to solve that problem. And it also trickles down at the end to also being able, at the end, after you have the solution, to translate it back into the answer. At the beginning is more translating that problem into the right solution. And I find it that it's very, very difficult. It's easy to start off with a nice clean data set that you find on Kaggle and implementing a model that is highly performant, but then think about it, how does this model actually solve the problem? It's actually the model itself in the entire AI solution ends up being a really tiny part. If you think about it, I'll just give a small example. Think about churn prediction. Many organizations think that this is the most important model that they need to have. But then when I ask them, if I give you a probability whether a customer leaves, what do you do with that probability? How will you use it in practice so that you see, this model is really valuable? And where do you put the threshold? Starting which probability are you actually targeting your customers? So the AI algorithm is actually a tiny part. There is a lot of thinking that needs to go around it in order to solve the problem. So this would be, I think, from my point of view, at least for me personally, the biggest challenge that I'm also now trying to figure out how to deal with.
Thank you. Any questions already from the audience? Yes, up there. Or down here, yes.
Now you're next. The wrong person. I'm first. Thanks a lot. Now, you guys, once you made a model and you made it to production, you already mentioned that it's going to be sometimes stale, so you have to update it. And so, once you develop a model, are you then a lifelong? Do you have the lifelong responsibility to maintain it, or how do you manage this? Because if you deploy a model in production, you would like to go on and develop another one, and who else? What should be the qualifications of the persons keeping these models alive?
Should I can start answering that question, because if you at some point end up with, let's say, take it easy, 10 models in production, and you need one single person to deal with that models, you already come to the conclusion AI is supposed to automate things, right? So we should also automate this process. This is why I was talking towards the end about model management. So these kind of activities need to be automated mechanisms implemented as well. It doesn't have to be AI, it can be some simple, rule-based systems are also AI at the end of the day, but you should be able, or you should aim towards automating, because you don't want your data scientist being occupied in checking daily whether the model is still performing accordingly. And obviously you need your data scientists for that, because other domain experts or other employees in the company might not understand the models. So it's not really scalable. So basically investing into these also software capabilities to automate these aspects would be my answer.
Yeah, actually I could not give a better one, because Corinna is a colleague of mine, so therefore I was also interested into your answer to that.
I think it's already a start to at least deploy. So like I said, 85% don't make it to production. If I see a model in production that is bringing value, so first it brings value, because if it doesn't bring value, you turn it off. Why would you run a computer endlessly performing and giving you scores that nobody's using? So you turn it off. So it's very rare to see that at the end you need model management in production. So not many people start thinking about that. But those who do make it, even with the first model, you immediately see this need. You don't have to collect 10 models. You immediately see that need, because you want your data scientists to work on the next project, and the next project you don't want them sitting around monitoring models.
And actually, it comes also into the direction that you have to, as a data scientist, you have to look a bit into other disciplines like data engineering or the infrastructure to understand that, to really know that afterwards, after developing the model, you're not done. You still have to hand over, and someone has to take care about it. So building a diverse team of data science and data engineers, at least people knowing the infrastructure, is something key in this field. And I think also we as data scientists, it's my personal opinion of course, but often we focus so much on algorithms that we really forget about the infrastructure behind how the data comes to us. And without this knowledge, so we do not have to be experts in data engineering, but we should at least have the basic knowledge to understand how complex also this field is. It's the whole field. So it really, there are people professional only in data engineering, only under brackets, and this is really complex jobs to do, and you need someone with this skill set. Else you will never come to this automation thing. Thanks. There was a second question up there.
Thank you for the wonderful talk, and I think you guys are doing a great job with what you're doing. And I'm glad you spoke about model management, because that was actually what my question is based on. Because I want to know, how much does it actually cost to have such an infrastructure and to have it in production? Because it's easy to go on maybe Google Cloud Platform and then put on maybe an instance and train a model with a GPU or something. But with data in the industry, or with data at scale, how much does it actually cost?
Should I start again? I don't know. And I don't know, not because not trying things out or not having experiences, because it highly depends on the volume of the data and what kind of models you have in production that require such monitoring, and the number of models. But I'm guessing when you're asking about costs, you're asking about not employees and resources, but you're asking about cloud consumption, right? Yeah. I don't have a clear answer to that, because it varies, right? And I think it's important maybe to also do it right from the beginning, because you might incur high costs if you don't think about it before implementing such a platform in a good way. But I can assure you there are a lot of developments going on, including Crayon. We're working at this as a product, as a service, so that customers don't have to think anymore about implementing it themselves. So as a company who is also focusing on cloud consumption and optimizing the cloud consumption, it will of course be one of our key interests in making this solution also with low resources as possible.
Maybe another comment on that. So model management and maintenance of models and so on. So actually, in my opinion, yes, there are good services out there which could be used, but I do have the feeling that each industry wants to have this knowledge and also infrastructure in-house, which makes it a little more complicated, I would say. But one could orient what is out there, but in the end, I think that most of the companies want to build up this knowledge and all these competencies really in-house to maintain this on their own. So maybe taking concepts which exist out there, but never consume it due to IP reasons.
But just a question in between. So what would be your recommendations then for small and medium enterprises, because they cannot afford to like have servers, have data engineers and have the whole infrastructure there? What would you recommend there?
Actually, one idea which is somehow always possible is keep your IP by anonymizing your data. And then you could also maybe give it to external parties to investigate them and use whatever system they have in their background.
My answer would be cloud. I mean, nowadays on cloud you have not just platform as a service, you have software as a service, so many of the things are readily available. If you think about mobile application development, nowadays companies, they don't have anymore their own hardware infrastructure. They build everything within a few weeks from scratch, and you have already an online mobile application just within a few weeks, and this is all possible because of these services that are readily provided. So small and medium enterprises who want to go on this road, of course, we at least highly recommend it because it's much more efficient. You don't want at the end also to have yet another team that has to manage hardware and infrastructure, and 2 years later along the road you realize that you need to double your investment in order to increase this infrastructure because your models or whatever is running on that is not coping anymore with the heavy load. So it's definitely an answer to that.
And it's also, as we heard from Ms. Helischka in the morning, so there are European endeavors in this direction to really keep the data in Europe and that they are really protected by the GDPR. So I'm not sure, I'm not really up to date at this, how far we are, but these are these Gaia X projects and so on. Maybe this is then also the way to go more into cloud computing, because this is always the fear that the data are somewhere stored somewhere around the world where we do not have data protection laws or whatever. And if Europe goes for a solution in this way, I think then even cloud computing and cloud storage will be maybe more interesting for European countries as well, or companies. Yeah. Just up there's another question before I start my questions.
Do we have international standards for AI or data science?
Good question.
Well, especially for data science, the international standard, it's difficult to ask, especially me, as I'm not working in industry. I'm coming from basic research at university, and there are, of course, some international standards that need to be followed because our currency is publishing. And so for publishing, of course, there are international standards that need to be fulfilled. So everything that we try to publish is being reviewed internationally. And depending on the journal, for example, if you publish in Nature or Nature Genetics, there are up to 10 external reviewers that will also ask for your data. And the accessibility of data is an important aspect. So if you, more and more, what is getting more and more common is open access publishing. So you publish your data and you publish your result, but you open your books, so you give everyone access to your data so that all your results can be replicated or can be used, your data, for meta-analysis in other studies. And I think that's also an important question in times of COVID-19, when we're talking about the development of vaccines, and there's now an ongoing discussion on the vaccine that was developed in Russia, because obviously they published the results from their studies in more or less the highest ranking medical journal you can have. It's The Lancet. And when you look at the results, and they did not publish the raw data, they just published the results, it seems like the data look like they have been generated by rolling a dice. So there are many duplicates in numbers, and so especially in a journal for Lancet, like Lancet for example, we would expect that there is more control of data that are being published there. And especially in this situation, for example, it would be necessary to get access to the original data that are, of course, anonymized, so apart from the patient's name, as possible, so that other researchers can try to figure out what was going on, but they don't publish the data. So, yes, there are international standards, but also in high-ranking journals, obviously, under the pressure of getting published, sometimes these regulations are overseen or not taken seriously enough. And the other aspects that I've seen is that sometimes you get the link to the supplementary material that should be available for download, and when you try to access the data, the link is not working anymore. So this is also something you see frequently also in highly ranking journals. So yes, there are international standards. Are they always followed? I don't think so. So yes, but I think especially in these challenging times where everybody's watching, there is also a continuous pressure on scientists to show their data and to openly discuss also the limitations of the data they had collected. And I think this openness is something, being honest about the limitations is also something that needs to be trained and to be learned. Because even though we are all excited about our results, well, you never know if you're 100% right. So I have an example from my own research history. So as Olivia told, I was working on human evolution for most of my research life. And we developed models for human evolution and found out, and this has been replicated many times also by other research groups, that all modern humans developed or come from a woman living in Africa, living there 170,000 years ago. And we also had DNA from Neanderthals, mitochondrial DNA, and we also had DNA, for example, from frozen Fritz, which in Austria is known Ötzi. We found out now everything fits fine into a model. We had different kinds of models, graph theory, Markov chain Monte Carlo simulations, and all models that we applied showed us that the Neanderthals were a sister lineage to Homo sapiens, to modern humans. So they're not preceders, they're just a sister lineage. And many times I got a very strange question. I was asked, are the Basques, so people living in Catalonia, are they descendants from the Neanderthals? I don't know where this has been coming from, but I always said no. The Neanderthals have died out, and all our models show us unequivocally the Neanderthals have died out. We have no signs. Okay. So, turns out our DNA analysis is getting better. And when we now incorporate the new information, we see, oh, okay, we have still some genes from the Neanderthals in our own genes. So there was really a change in the paradigm that the Neanderthals have not really died out. So we still have some genes. And then it was, okay, now we're there. We have the Neanderthals in our genes, and there were always some questions, but in Asia, because people look so different, are they really descendants from the African lineage? And we would always answer, yes, of course, there is no other. It's one lineage out of Africa, and that's it. Well, then they found a little piece of bone in in a cave in central Russia, the Denisova cave, turns out it's another human lineage. And when we put it in our models, we see that we also carry genes, also we here in Europe, from this central Russian lineage of humans that have left Africa long before the Neanderthals and long before Homo sapiens sapiens. So, from my experiences, we have data now and we look at data now, but we always have to be cautious about the conclusions that we draw, because we never know the limitations. And so the clearer we state the limitations that we have from our data, and as Olivia said, 80% of the work is data clearance. Normally, could be more sometimes. We also don't know what we are missing out, because we just don't know. So I think this is an important aspect, especially now. We are collecting data worldwide, but we're still not there yet to answer all the questions that are coming up at the moment.
May I comment a little bit on that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, a really interesting question in general, if data itself could answer everything, maybe. But you also said that the accompanying information is also important to make interpretations in a right direction. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think comparable to humans' opinions, also results out of data can just be as good as the current knowledge is. So really predicting the future is only possible to some degree. So also data can just say what is inside them and nothing more. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could make the results a bit more interpretable and more interesting if we get accompanying or meta information on that data, but at the same time we are running in the direction of also bringing bias into it. So again, it's a kind of, okay, how to have a balanced situation also in that direction. But it's a good story. I will remember that.
And it really shows one of these pitfalls, the human touch of everything. So it's not some natural relationships or natural laws that we discover with data normally. So, but from time to time, yes, we do, but really seldomly. And you always have to bear in mind who did the analysis in the end and what kind of bias he or she brings to it. And also because if I start a data analysis and someone told me already something, I think we have this kind of problem and this is something we would like to now manifest with data, then you have already a bias because you want to know what kind of correlation, you know already what kind of correlation you want to see. And then as a human, as we all are, is that we really expect and then we look at that and we somehow, totally neglect everything on the side. So this is really one of the pitfalls. I think the human aspect in the technical sense is something important to think about. Here in front.
Thanks for your talk. It's very interesting, and I personally also faced many of the challenges that you mentioned. So actually I have two questions. The first one is about the technical challenge of the lack of engineering mindset. And you said that the solution could be to train your data scientists to have more engineering skills. But the problem is that when you become like engineering driven, then you are tempted to build small solutions on top of your model to compensate for failures, etc. And these solutions, they don't require a lot of time. They have like real impact. They are bad because they cannot be generalized. But then within your team, it gets more difficult for you to prove the relevance of taking time and effort to update your model. And because they don't know whether updating your model will have a big impact or not. Yeah, this is the first question. Should I say the second?
Maybe just wait for the answers and then...
Yeah, so the question, your question, if I understood correctly, is more how to overcome this while at the same time training your data scientists to be more to have more software engineering skills. Well, I think the main reason I mentioned that data scientists should learn more about software engineering is because most of the best data scientists don't come from a computer science background like myself. And I think if you want them then to be incorporated into an interdisciplinary team with software engineers and data engineers, they need to be able to speak that language. I have seen teams at the customers where they wouldn't speak to each other because they wouldn't understand each other. So this leads then to the fact that data scientists get isolated. They don't know how to explain to the software engineer what their model does or how the results should be integrated into the whole system. So my reasoning for that is more to allow this kind of communication channel, not necessarily that the data scientist now starts implementing software solutions. However, I have seen also very, very good data scientists who are very strong in software engineering, like full stack data scientists, and they know how to draw this line and how to ensure that where their efforts are invested is also meaningful because they understand both worlds. You need to understand the data science part of it and also how you're influencing the software engineering part of it on your model. So my recommendation would be is maybe if you feel like you're going too much into the direction in influencing this part and you're getting distracted, then leave that part to the software engineers and data engineers and just allow this knowledge to help you communicate with them. If you want to become more of a full stack data scientist, then I guess the answer to that would be invest more effort in understanding when you fall into this pitfall and how to avoid it next time.
Yeah, maybe could be summarized with the term you said, awareness. Awareness of all the different parties involved in working on that, and understanding of each other, speaking the same language. Yeah, again, emphasizing awareness.
Second one?
Also the second question is about the bias in the data sets. So what do you do when you work like on a real data set application and also like the distribution of the data is also in real life it's itself biased and your model is supposed to work in real life? Do you have to do like or to try and balance your data set and drop that bias, or do you say, oh, since real life has bias, so I allow my model as well to be?
Does anyone else want to answer? I can. Yeah. I think there is good bias and bad bias. And there are different biases. I think someone did a count at some point, at least 20 different biases, right? The good bias is something that it's inherent in the data because you do want a pattern or some kind of relationship between your target variable and your input variables, right? Otherwise, your models might not perform so well. So there are some things that are inherently there and you can use it. The bias gets only bad when your data is not reflecting anymore the reality of things and is trying then to make predictions that are not beneficial for those who use it at the end. So your question was, how do you deal with these things? Do you remove it? I think it's important to first identify the effect of the bias. And usually it's not really easily detectable. Sometimes it goes undetected and you only notice it, I think, after it's been used in production and already producing bad results or not relevant results. I think to understand first the effect, because if you understand the effect, then you know also how to deal with that effect. Do you then remove it from the data? Because not always the bias in data, the answer is to remove it. Because maybe it's inherent in the data and you will have it anyways, and by removing it, you're removing information. So it's, I think, understanding the effect and how to deal with that effect. And it might not come necessarily to removing it from the data. This is my personal opinion and experience.
Any one of you would like to comment on that? No? Okay.
I really like to listen to Hilda. I do.
We totally agree from industry point of view here. Yeah, it's really a different thing, and it somehow, because we talked now a lot about these technical challenges, and it somehow fits but to the next question, because we just have not so many, like 10 minutes left. Time passes quickly. I would like to pose one question which goes into the direction really bias, and what are the challenges? We talked really a lot about technical challenges, but to me I think there are also some ethical challenges, mindset challenges. We touched it already, but really this, I know the most common example is the self-driving car, and I don't want to stress this example, but there are so many ethical questions. So how does the algorithm decide who developed the algorithm, how diverse is, for example, if I base it on some images or some people, how diverse is my development team? So what is your opinion to that? So just leaving apart now the technical challenges, we would love to discuss about that, but what would be some ethical challenges we have to solve here?
Yeah, actually I would summarize this question under how can we trust in algorithms, or how to make other people trust in what we are delivering in the end. I think this will come naturally over time, because when I think of the beginnings of computer science, I would say also nowadays hardly anyone out there is able to build or program a computer, but everyone's using it. And this came over time. This came also via showing what the benefits are when using computers and so on. But over time, we just took it for granted. And in my hope, actually, the same will happen with AI. So if people are getting more and more used to it and experience all the advantages in their daily life, also trust comes at the same time with these things. The only critical part we are facing nowadays is the huge hype about AI. So we should not stress this, that it then goes into the complete other direction. So again, it's a kind of, I would say, having realistic expectations on what AI can do, and do not promise the customer things he wants to hear but which are not possible nowadays. So, and with keeping all that in mind, I would say then the future for AI is open.
I could add something to that. I agree with that. I think there are many aspects that need to be tackled. First, the people working on this kind of solution. So in order to ensure cultural diversity, gender diversity, and so on, because if you don't have that, you might develop a model that's not representative. Then there is the data aspect and the technical aspect. There are now a lot of things going on in the direction, how do you ensure that the data that you're using is actually relevant and, let's say, good enough to use it for a model. And I think it will go more and more, since standards were mentioned earlier, into certifying data and ensuring that the data, so someone gives you the green light, you can use that data. And another part of the research that is happening a lot, and there are already toolboxes, I'm not sure if you've heard, for example, of AI Fairness 360. It was developed by IBM. So you have just the same as you have a toolbox of metrics to ensure the performance of the model. You have also a toolbox of metrics to ensure the fairness of those models. And I think more and more research will be invested into this area to ensure that the models are performing well, and then that the data is good enough so that to be used on models. I think soon it will come the time when, especially in Europe, there are ISO standards now in this area being developed, where it won't be any more possible to just apply AI everywhere, especially if it gets into production, right? So once something gets into production, it needs to pass specific tests. And yeah, these are the aspects that I see there, a lot of work and investment being done recently.
And I think it also links very well to what Anita said before, this open data thing. In industry, we are not really into open data yet, but for me, this showing reproducibility is also going into this direction to validate, because the more people, the more research group work on the same data set, you really reproduce the same statements afterwards, and this is also some kind of fairness and some kind of quality seal you get in the end, that your decisions that you made with this data are correct.
And another aspect, as you said, about gender and diversity and ethical aspects, what I just read, it's also a problem, I think, of not only machine learning or artificial intelligence, but also who applies it. So there is an app that helps you get your perfect makeup on. So you can, it's maybe not some really, well, I probably wouldn't really need help with that because I never use makeup, but it advises you what kind of rouge fits you well, and eye shade, and the color of your lipstick. And well, while you're doing this, it takes in account the color of your eye and the shape of your face and the color of your hair. And it seems to work well for Caucasians, but turns out it doesn't work at all for example, African Americans. So, of course, if we need also, if software solutions that are maybe necessary or not are developed, of course it's necessary to think broader and to make it applicable in a wider context. I think that's an important aspect.
Yeah, since we're, there are 2 more questions, okay. We do these 2 and then we shift everything to after the conference.
I have also a question regarding these ethical problems. Do you think that sometimes we as data scientists are kind of also responsible to talk to governmental institutions to educate the young kids really from the beginning, not just in the way that, okay, you should kind of learn to understand the data and the algorithms from young age also, but also learn them and train them what are the effects of agreeing in giving data and allowing the usage of data kind of everywhere. I think this is something which we do not really talk a lot about, and that maybe, I don't know if we are kind of responsible and should feel responsible to talk more to teachers or persons who are dealing with these kids, or I don't know.
I don't think this is a question, I think this is an answer. Because there's a yes and no, and the no is just simply not conceivable in this setting. I do believe in that, and what I was saying before, I wish someone would have taught me about these things and not just about the theoretical science of mathematics and statistics before I went into the industry and applied them, because I think it's so easy to make mistakes if you don't have this awareness about the impact that AI has on humans. And sometimes just coming from the science aspect and just applying it, you might be too focused on the algorithms themselves and not think about the implications. And if you don't start thinking about it when already working on it, who will think about it right afterwards? So I think it has to happen as early as possible at the beginning of this chain. And as a data scientist, I do believe that everyone should feel responsible about what they're working on.
Yeah, since we are out of time, but I have also something to say to that, because I think it also goes in the direction of using social media, somehow also related to that, isn't it? Okay, I see.
So you will shift it to the break, or your answer, or
I would say so, because otherwise maybe we are running out of time. Sorry.
Put the final question for today's panel.
I guess a final wrap-up question. Thanks a lot for all your talks. I think it's very inspirational, and I guess that some of those who are sitting here are also watching on the live stream now getting really motivated, jumping into this data science field. And you talked about that
the field is not really defined yet, and also the industry is facing problems. And I think also the education for it is still its beginning. So we heard about some data science, maybe studies, and there are boot camps and whatever, but there is not this one way and then you're a data scientist and then you jump into industry. Do you have any proposal or tip or whatever that for those who are now really motivated to step in your kind of footsteps and to say, we need these people with this education or maybe personality, whatever, they want to join and also want to jump into this data lake?
Maybe I see there are two different questions actually in your statement, and I would comment on the first one regarding how to make people getting used to all that stuff. And I think this, or also regarding education, somehow this already started in education of kindergarten and for, primary school, whether they should use a computer, yes or no. And the answer in that direction is, I think, still quite diverse, because no one knows what is the correct age to start with getting into touch with all these new technologies and so on. So I think first question would really be to when is it good for children to get in contact? It's a simple question. When does your child should get his first smartphone? Because this is a kind of starting point, getting used to any kind of new technology, and then as a second step also regarding any AI-related topic. But I think this was just a first part of your statement. And second one was, okay, what should be the advice to the outer world on how to become a data scientist, maybe? Yeah, it's passion, I would say. And yeah, with that, I also want to close statements on my side, but I want to welcome you also talking to me then afterwards, if we have time, so that also my colleagues have the chance to make some final words on that.
If I might also answer your question, so we're at the moment establishing a new study, a degree program that is starting in autumn 2021, and it's called data science. So for all those who now think, okay, data scientist, this is what I always wanted to be, just apply. So starting from next autumn, we have a degree program here, and that's also focusing on the diverse aspects of data science, because as we all come from different disciplines and try to tackle the problems from diverse aspects also. So if you're purely mathematician, you need to get an idea about informatics engineering, and if you're an informatician, you also need to get input, for example, from health sciences or medical care. So if you're interested, check out our homepage. And we're happy to see you there.
I'll also add to that answer and also to the fellow panelists. I think it's our responsibility, those who have made those mistakes and started off this journey, to create more awareness. This is what we're trying to do today. So I see the skills that a data scientist should have, or there are the soft skills and there are the hard skills. And I have the feeling that the image that is being distributed in the media and online about what a good data scientist should be, it's very one-directional and very focused on, just do as many Kaggle competition as you can, and if you get a model from 78% accuracy to 92, you're the best data scientist ever. Or become a grandmaster on Kaggle. I have nothing against it, but I have the feeling that nowadays data scientists are getting developed more into this direction. So I think we should create more awareness also about the other soft skills that are necessary for the data scientists in order to become better at their job in applying data science. So yes, integrate it into the educational system, and yeah, I think put more information out there about this kind of challenges, about what it means to work in data science, so that others don't have to make the same mistakes.
Thanks a lot. Perfect last statement. Thank you. I totally agree. Also, this data science, as a lot of other disciplines, they are not isolated anymore. So but data science for me especially is you always need to have other experts. You work in diverse teams from background and from the knowledge. You always need to have the experts, and therefore you need all these soft skills. You need to talk to people and so on. You cannot be isolated. So totally agree. Yeah, with that, 1 hour passes so quickly if you talk about interesting topics. So panel discussion is already over. Thank you very much to all three of you for joining us and for sharing your experience. It was very interesting. I learned also a lot in the last 60 minutes. Yeah, give a round of applause. Yes, and with that, this was the last agenda item for today. We're done. Thank you very much again for attending. Online, offline, it was really a pleasure. I had a lot of fun organizing it together also with Anita. Anita, thank you very much for helping me out. And also with that, I would like to ask all helping hands on stage just to give you a round of applause again. So Anja, please come on stage. Anita, come on stage. Christoph, come on stage. Besiana, please also. And I don't know if Ewald, if you can. No, you cannot. Okay, so Ewald will stay back, our technician. These are all the helping hands I introduced at the beginning who helped us organize everything. Claudia, oh Claudia, sorry, I forgot you. No, Claudia, please. No, Claudia, please on stage. If I forgot, no, I don't. Everybody here, all the other, yeah. Yeah, an applause for them as well. Martin is not here in the room, so this is also the guy who prepared everything. Thank you also to Martin online if he watches afterwards. Thanks a lot. Yes, and a very final remark. As we said in the beginning, together with Anita, we were excited about the feedback we got already in March. So we had like 80 to 90 subscriptions. I do not know the exact number. In March, today we had again 80 to 90 subscriptions. Of course, due to the situation, it was a bit online, offline. We have not so many people here on site. But anyhow, we decided already months ago that we will continue. So this will not be the last Women in Data Science Villach. We will have a Women in Data Science in 2021 for sure. So we don't know the date yet. We will let you know. You're on our mailing list. And we are happy for any, so if you say now, wow, cool, I want to participate, of course you're invited. If you say, I have good ideas about talks, about topics, panel discussion. Because currently we are 2, 1 in baby break, so please join the organization team. If you have feedback, something to improve, maybe some ideas how to do it next time, feel free to do it. We are happy for your feedback. You have our contact, just write us an email. We do not have any social media channel or something like this where you can post it, but just write us an email and we introduce this into our next conference. And with that, I'm just here to say goodbye. Have a safe trip home. Thank you for joining. And hopefully see you next year, safe and healthy.